so back to Jess, as well as Marcela Santos and Lucy Barrera, who will give a presentation on a life purpose in ALS MND caregivers. And there's a short video. Thank you.
Presentation from ACELA, the Colombian ALS MND Association, a life purpose in ALS MND caregivers. Your speakers today are Marcela Santos, daughter of Alfredo Santos, rest in peace, and myself, Jessica Mabe, daughter of Cecilia de Mabe, rest in peace. And we want to give credit to Lucy Barrera, daughter of Hector Barrera, rest in peace. Lucy was a key contributor to this presentation and a strong advocate for caregivers in Colombia. The three of us are active volunteers for ACELA, and our parents lived with ALS MND, and we were caregivers for them. A little about ACELA. ACELA was founded in 2008 by Orlando Ruiz, diagnosed with ALS MND in 2001. At the time, there was so little information available, he made it his life purpose to build ACELA and make the journey for other ALS MND patients and their families a lot easier than what it was for him at the time. ACELA is a team of volunteers, all with present and past experiences with ALS MND. To date, ACELA has helped over 3,000 pals and their families. Before an airplane takes off, we are provided with safety instructions that clearly say, be sure to put your mask on before helping others. The act of putting yourself first might feel selfish and being egocentric, but in this case, it's the first step in order to be strong and properly care for another. Forgetting about yourself to attend others usually leads to both not breathing, and this is why this safety instruction on an aircraft is so important. As caregivers, we forget that we need to take care of ourselves to properly care for our loved one. We share this example as we see this being the challenge most of our caregivers have. Taking hold of your life as a caregiver does not happen straight away. It is a journey. It starts with confronting reality and understanding that my life has changed. It is normal the feeling that the ground has shifted beneath me and to be able to identify and understand the type of caregiver I can be. The next stage is understanding and learning to search for help. This involves learning where to find help and support, identifying the special needs you now have and having to make decisions and adjustments. Then you reach the readjusting my life stage, which is what we're focusing on today. At this stage, the caregiver asks themselves what they had stopped doing, where do they go from here, and learns to find a balance that allows them to understand that they also exist and need to live. And this is key for the caregiver's mental health, and as a result, being able to provide good care to their loved one. Before we move on, we need to understand the type of caregiver we are so that we can move forward and identify the kind and types of help needed. We have the caregivers that live with pals, cover expenses, and make decisions, or the caregiver that lives with pals, can't help financially, and they stopped working and are a full-time caregiver. We also have those that live nearby, but only visit a few hours per week as they work and have a family. And there is the caregiver that lives nearby, provides relief and respite time for the primary caregiver, contributes financially and takes part in decisions. And we have those that live far away but contribute financially or can't help financially but take part in decisions. I think almost all caregivers identify with this image. This feeling of my life was organized and planned, then the ALS MND diagnosis arrives and my life now revolves around it. And all these changes start happening, like changes in lifestyle, having to rearrange work and social life, which of course then results in a feeling of isolation and poor distribution of time and overload. A whole load of feelings take over, like I have no energy, ALS MND has taken over, I am no longer important, my loved one with pals is the only important thing. Everyone has an opinion but don't really understand the reality. I have to make important decisions every day. I judge and I am being judged about how I handle the care for my loved one. The important thing is for the caregiver to realize that they now have a new role. I am a caregiver, but our key message to them is that it's not the only role that defines them. For example, I am still a mother or a sister, a professional, a wife, a husband, a brother, and whichever role applies to you. Next is to learn to come to terms with the changes in my life. Our volunteer, Olga Mejia, wife of Elkin, diagnosed in December 2018, explains it this way. You have two options, stay living in chaos or rearrange your life. It is about finding a way to move forward with this new reality. To rearrange your life, it starts with us wanting to do it and having personal growth projections. Caregivers need to identify what step they are on, and then they will be able to find and get the help they need to get to the next step. Once you reach to the step of I want to do it, you start moving upwards and you find yourself getting to the stages of trying, understanding, then I can do it, and I will do it, and then I did it. This staircase applies to work, self-care, hobbies, and caring for my loved one living with ALS MND. Remember that this journey is not for the caregiver to do alone. You will need the help of support system that could be family, doctor, friends, colleagues, health professionals. We can't forget about self-care, and let's think back to the initial slide of putting on the mask before helping others. As caregivers, we need to understand that we are also important. We need to be able to reflect on our well-being and take action so that we are okay. And this can come from many areas: calmness, work, social life, finances, and/or spiritualism. Unfortunately, we are not superhuman. We wish we were, but the reality is we are human. I will provide you with a personal anecdote where I was so focused on my mom and ALS MND, I ignored the signs my body was giving me for over a week, and I ended up in A&E having an emergency appendectomy with peritonitis complications and giving my parents even more distress. Even superheroes had a support team or a support system. Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, they all have a support network. So we invite all caregivers to look in the mirror and do a personal assessment of their well-being and work on the areas they are not doing well, and rely on their support network. If they don't feel they have one, start work on building one. This is for the best interest of the caregiver and the person living with ALS MND.
Caregivers often put their needs as secondary to the needs of the patients, and self-care should always come first. There are many aspects in self-care. For example, physical health. You have to prevent and heal physical injuries. Listen to your body and rest when necessary. Learn proper ways to mobilize your pulse to avoid injuries, and do moderate exercise or physical activity. In nutrition, you should eat a balanced and healthy meal. Just like some doctors, caregivers have bad eating habits due to their busy schedule. Balanced and healthy food and taking your time to eat calmly will increase your self-care and physical health as well. Emotional well-being. Caregivers often carry around undeserved guilt, believing that they are not doing enough for their loved ones. This guilt can make the caregiving role even more stressful than it actually is. In order to cope with caregiver guilt, you must take time for yourself, look at the bigger picture, realize this is not for life, it's just a moment in your life. Accept that you're human and have flaws. Know that you're making the best decision for you and your loved one at that time with those new circumstances, and reach out for support from family, friends, caregivers, support groups. At home, you must remember to make your home a pleasant place. My home is a home, not a clinic. For example, my mom used to dress up the oxygen tanks for every holiday. They had Halloween costumes, Christmas costumes, carnival costumes, and that made the home even more cozy and more welcoming for the patient, but also the rest of the family and guests that came over to visit. So you must make reasonable adjustments so that it's easy to take care of your pals. For example, move your pal's room to the first floor if it's a 2-story house. Next slide, please. In order to readjust your life, you also have to take in consideration the social life you like and want. Whatever your desire is it to invite friends over, go to a party, you go play cards, or travel, you must look for what gives you peace and joy, even if it includes your patient or not. For example, Elizabeth and Juvenal, the photo to the left, they had the dream to go on a helicopter ride, and she took her husband to do that. And it was the best day of his life, basically, and he's been living with ALS for 21 years. Rocio and Orlando, the photo to the right, our founder of ACELA, they usually watch soccer games together, have some drinks, they travel as well. So you have to look for ways to either include your patient in your social life, but it's also not wrong if you don't. I have often found codependency between pals and cows because they feel guilty of enjoying a social life pals can no longer live. My dad used to say, I'm the one who's sick, not you. You go out there and live. And there's many ways to involve your pals in your social life. You can take pictures, videos, send them to them, and they can be connected and living the experience with you virtually. Next slide, please. In order to look for economic tranquility, you must make adjustments to ensure a financial stability in the short and long term. You must also consider the caregiver's independence. For example, many caregivers acquire life insurance for themselves or create a savings account for children's educations or even get an education insurance plans. These economic decisions don't have to revolve 100% around ALS, and it could be an investment or a business venture not related to the PALS profession. Next slide, please. In order to do a professional fulfillment, you must take in consideration there are many options. Whatever the caregiver's desire is, what gives them peace of mind, that's what you should do. If it's continuing with your job, if it's making reasonable adjustments to keep doing the job remotely from home or hybrid, some days going to the office, some days staying at home to take care of your pals, or change jobs related to ALS MND like Jessica and I have done, or change jobs not related to ALS MND, or even quit working. All of these are valid options, and they're also not permanent. They're not set in stones. They are options done in readjusting situations due to the circumstances of ALS. For example, Raul and Diana, the ones you see in these pictures, Raul was a professional tennis player. And when he got ALS, he and his wife, Diana, founded a nonprofit tennis school for underprivileged kids here in Colombia. Now that Raul has died, his legacy continues through his wife's work in the nonprofit. That's a way to include your pals in your professional fulfillment as well. Next slide, please. Spirituality is also a very important aspect in self-care and readjusting your life. For many pals and cows, spirituality or religiosity is an important resource for coping, and spirituality as part of the support system. Many studies have identified spirituality as a resource that actually promotes quality of life. And nourishing your spirituality can help you relieve anguish and provide emotional well-being. Spirituality is an important part of wellness, and it is, in some cases, indispensable in a multidisciplinary care and holistic approach. Next slide, please. We also have to think about readjusting our life afterwards, after our pulse is gone. I put this image up just for the fun of it. Imagine in a hive, there's always one queen bee, and the pulse, in this case, is our queen bee. The rest of the bees, which are the family members and caregivers, serve the queen and treat her like royalty. But what happens when the queen bee leaves the hive, or when the queen bee dies? Suddenly, the colony is upset and loses track of what to do, or in function of what to revolve or serve. They usually just get quickly a new one. In order to prevent this feeling of being lost, caregivers must always put their needs first. This means a life project with or without ALS, so that they don't feel lost when the queen bee is gone. So you must plan the future beyond ALS. Next slide.
We want to share with you the work that an incredible team of caregivers has been doing in Colombia regarding the proposal for a caregivers law. This is the work of many years. There is still a way to go, but the process has started. The proposed law wants to guarantee the rights of people living with ALS, MND, and other illnesses, as well as the caregivers that care for them. This would include education and preparation to care for the patient, access to equipment that will help with the care and well-being of the patient, and financial benefits. The work done for this law proposal has been championed by ALS MND caregivers and other caregivers from other chronic diagnoses. They are a great example of caregivers with a new life purpose. It is a long road to go still to get the law approved, but the process has begun. To conclude, we recommend caregivers the following. Assess your status as a caregiver. What type of caregiver can you be? Rearrange your life and not necessarily all around ALS MND. Assess yourself constantly. Be aware of self-care, mental, physical, and emotional health. Have a social life, have a support network, and if you don't have one, start building one. Look for professional fulfillment, present and/or in the future. And remember, spirituality can also be a support system. Thank you very much. And now we are ready for questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Jess and Marcela. And I want to thank you, Jess, in particular for sharing your what I term your own self-care misadventure. But I'm sure that you're a superwoman to your family, despite causing them some pain, I suppose, for not taking sort of that greater care of yourself. And I think that's really important in regard to people caring for others, is to have that, not only the self-care but also that self-awareness. And I think, and it's probably a question for one or both of you. If we look at lifestyle data from around the world, and you know, Australia, where I live, is not immune to this. The self-care and nutrition and emotional needs are probably at a less than desirable base for the normal population. So when you overlay that as a caregiver, how do you actually readjust a life, and when we're actually probably from a lifestyle data perspective, starting from as I said, less than desirable base?
I would like to tackle this one. Thank you for the question, David. So in the psychology sessions we have periodically with the patients here, we are in charge of checking all those areas, checking how their social life is going, economic burden is going, decision making, health, nutrition. So we're checking for the caregiver's well-being as well, not only the patient, which is often what usually happens. Everybody asks the patient how he's doing or she's doing, but we never ask the caregiver how they're doing. So in those personal sessions I have with the caregivers, that's how we assess periodically how they're doing, and teach them and guide them and give them the tools so they can make the adjustments along the line. We don't believe in like anticipating this disease that can take 20 years, as you can see in one of our many of our patients here. But it just, with the time, as the disease progresses, we are adjusting their life project and their life conditions as well.
Okay, that makes sense. Still a challenge though, but yes, no, it does make some good sense. So there's a question. I'm not sure who it's from, but anyway, and the question's to both of you in terms of whether you have a self-assessment tool for the periodic check.
Oh, I want one. I think we should start working on one, especially on the tools we've seen on the previous in the previous presentations. I think it's complex. I think I mentioned that also on a previous. I think there are a lot of variables for a tool. It depends on the type of caregiver, the age of the caregiver, the role of the caregiver, what stage of the ALS MND journey they're both on, and that all will require a different set of needs. So I think we definitely need a tool. I'm not entirely sure I think there's a lot of work still to do with regards to how to build it, because it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah, I usually use the Wheel of Life tool, which is a psychology tool for actually from Buddhism.
Yeah,
and it has all the areas, and that's the one I usually use, but we don't have one adapted to ALS, but we should start working on one, Jess.
Yes.
Oh, well, after this alliance meeting, you can get on and do it. It'd be good. Thank you. There was a comment that was made, which I've just temporarily lost. Okay, the comment that was made, but I'm going to shift it into a question. So we have caregivers who, of course, provide support to people with ALS, MND. But what happens post ALS, MND in terms of how do we ensure that caregivers have a good life? You know, that they live well.
So I don't know, may I just? So that's it has to do with the bee metaphor I did. Basically is, so that doesn't happen, we have to prepare beforehand, not only when the patient is gone, but before the patient is gone, you have a support system, you have a social life that doesn't involve your patient, you have hobbies, you have entertainment, things that don't necessarily have to be related to the patient. That way it will be easier to get back on track after the patient is gone. See? And some caregivers dedicate their whole life on caregiving. They don't take a trip, they don't even go to the doctor's appointment, they don't do anything else, just care. And that can be 10, 15 years doing that. And when the patient is gone, they're like, who am I? I was a caregiver, now I'm not, like, what's going on? So that's why we are constantly telling the caregivers, take breathing spaces, separate yourself from your patient as well, have your own hobbies, and yeah, what we talked about in the presentation. That's how we prevent it.
Yeah, I mean, it must be very difficult for somebody to transition from that sense of purpose where they are there as a caregiver, and as you say, for 10, 15 years, and then they're not. And so they lose that sense of purpose, sense of identity, and it must be very, very hard for them to then pivot to, you know, something different or something that they used to experience. So.
And to add to that, it doesn't have to be 10, 15 years. It can be a short journey and still be, you know, a shock. And I use this a lot, sort of, you know, when the time comes, it always comes as a shock. No matter how prepared you think you are, you will always be shocked. And it's like you're suddenly being thrown into life. It's like you've been living this life and suddenly you're in another life and you're just trying to catch up with what's been going around you. Which you sort of have been sort of, you know, you've had your blinkers on and just sort of focusing on ALS, MND. And that just makes sort of the transition so much harder because you're catching up on something else. And I always say it's like the sooner we can start sort of helping caregivers with sort of trying to plan a little bit more towards the future. I'm not saying it's going to be easier. It will still be tough, but it will be a little bit easier to what it could be.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, thank you. And unfortunately, we've run out of time. So thank you, Jessica and Marcela, and Lucy as well, for that interesting presentation. And